right, let's continue our NHL preview. We previously did the top players in the NHL today, so let's just do our top 10 players in the history of the National Hockey League as it sits right now. Always some controversy around these sorts of discussions. I can't wait for the basketball one coming up in a little bit. But going to start this one off with a personal favorite of two personal favorites, actually my two favorite players growing up. So remarkable amounts of bias on this. Absolutely 100%, without question, remarkable amounts of bias on here. But I'm putting Pavel Bure at 10 and Eric Lindros at 9. I think both of them really did, though, change how this game was looked at and played. Eric Lindros, the quintessential power forward. Every team wanted to have one. You had to change how you defended a little bit. And there was a stretch there where this guy was one of the most dominant players in the National Hockey League, and that line, one of the most dominant. Never really got over the hump. They do get to the Cup final that one time against the Detroit Red Wings, and then got the fuck kicked out of them. But either way, he was great. And Pavel Bure, so dynamic with what he was able to do as a hockey player. The speed that he was able to play with, the hands that he had, all of it, all the way around. One of the great hockey players that we have ever seen, and really did introduce another level of skill to this sport. At 8, I am going to put Sidney Crosby. Just a remarkable career that he has had to this point. I would suggest the winning is kind of done now with him, unless the Penguins really do turn some things around. But you look at iconic moments with the gold medal goal, the multiple times Stanley Cup champions, and just the face of this league for a extremely long period of time. In terms of especially what it looked like it was going to be when he had those concussion issues at that time. But I just think the high level that he has been able to keep for so long definitely earns him a spot on this list. Our first goalie pops up at number 7, and it is Dominik Hasek. The top goalie debate of all time is certainly one that will rage on. And you certainly could make the debate that if you put Hasek on any of the other teams, or on several other teams at that time, then he has 3 or 4 Stanley Cup finals. But what he was able to do, and I think I don't even want to say a coming out party, because you knew in '98 when the Czech Republic beat Canada, so that Canada went down into the bronze medal game. Everyone knew going into that just how good that guy was, but that was the superstar all-time worthy moment for Dominik Hasek. Those Buffalo Sabres teams that he played on relied heavily on Hasek, and then as his career winds down, he goes to a Detroit team and ends up getting his Stanley Cup. But just one of the true all-time greats, and absolutely one that you had to, I don't even want to say alter your game plan for, because there was no, something just fell here. There was no game plan that was going to work against him. He was one of those guys where if Buffalo scored 1, you would just kind of get this, we have to get 2? We have to get 2 tonight on this guy? How are we going to do that? So he comes in at number 7. At 6, it is the person who I do have as the best goalie of all time, Patrick Waugh. These two guys are side by side for a reason. Not a whole lot separates them. I do think if you flip-flopped them, that you would still have relatively similar careers in terms of if Hasek was on the Colorado Avalanche and if Waugh was on the Buffalo Sabres and some of those other teams. Waugh was just, he was so steady and he was so solid. Doesn't quite have the international success that a Dominik Hasek has, but there was just a presence to him in goal. And there was obviously a fire to him as well, but it's just that the solid play and the consistency, again, for an extremely long period of time, gets him that mark for me as the top goalie of all time. Into our top 5, and we have a trio of defensemen. First up, we have a couple of defensemen, sorry. First up, it is Nicklas Lidstrom. You can, I think, pretty clearly see from this list what era of hockey I grew up in. But Nick Lidstrom just, There was nothing he couldn't do out on that ice. His defensive, he was in the right spot always. There was never a time where he was caught out of position. He could skate well enough to keep up with everyone. As the eras changed on him, he had a phenomenal shot that would allow him to be a weapon offensively. And on a team filled with leaders in Detroit, he was one who stood out. Like I said, that there's just nothing that you would want a defenseman to do that he couldn't do. At 4, it's Mr. Hockey. It's Gordie Howe. Admittedly, didn't see a whole lot of how he played, as you know, he's quite a bit older than I am, but just the quintessential hockey player for so long. And we talk about longevity with some of these other dudes. Come on, the longevity of Gordie Howe certainly earns him this spot on Mount Rushmore, but he wouldn't get this only for playing a long time. Jaromir Jagr's not on this list. That's not even a shot at Jagr. He probably would have made it on if I wasn't so biased toward the bottom two guys. But for Gordie Howe, again, kind of just did everything you would want a player to do on the ice, and he was just so revered, and so he has to get the spot on the Mount Rushmore. At 3, it's Bobby Orr. Longevity not a strength of his, but what he was able to do while he was out there is second to none in terms of defenseman, in terms of speed and skill for that era and that time to really leave your mark on the Boston Bruins franchise in the way he did. He certainly earns the number 3 spot. At 2, it is Mario Lemieux, which means that number 1 is pretty obvious. There are a lot of people who will contend that Lemieux, because he could play a bit more of a power forward style while still elevating his teammates in the way number 1 did, certainly earns consideration for being number 1. And while I certainly don't disagree with that, look, I'm not going to spend this one degrading him so that we can talk about the other guy. Mario Lemieux was phenomenal. Again, what he could do, it looked like he could see the game in slow motion the whole time. And again, the hands exquisite. Bigger body dude for that time, so he could get to some tougher areas. Clear offensive gifts that you wouldn't believe, and can't really quantify these as well, but a real leader out there as well for the Pittsburgh Penguins. And then number 1 is Wayne Gretzky. When you have more assists than anyone has points in the history of the National Hockey League, like, come on. I don't even know what there is to say. Like, there isn't a whole lot that hasn't been said about him. For his time, he could play that game at a speed that very few else could. He saw the game in ways that no one else, maybe even in the history of the sport, has ever been able to see it. He had a creativity for the time that was second to none. He elevated everyone around him, and not just on his line. Like, the entire team gets elevated when Wayne Gretzky is out on the ice. Again, nothing from an offensive standpoint that he couldn't do. So he comes in as the number 1 player on this list. So that is it for the rankings portion for our NHL previews this year.